will remain unresolved. What do you say to the families about how you will deal with their loved ones? And I guess the bottom line is, do you find the Iranian leadership trustworthy? And Madam President, welcome to the U.S. You canceled a previous...
All right, we're apparently having some transmission issues. We'll try to go back to the president and hear what the Brazilian president
I think that gentleman was
there.
about to ask, the previous trip. Yeah, well,
yes.
he was asking about a previous trip that had been canceled right before we lost our feed there. Dilma Rousseff had canceled a prior visit to the United States after, as we mentioned, those allegations of U.S. officials spying on Brazilian government officials. Let's take a listen to see if we can get an answer to that.
And have you received assurances, and are you satisfied with the answers you have received from the administration? Thank you.
Well, first of all, Jim, with respect to U.S. citizens, U.S. persons who were held in Iran, this is something that we continue to push hard on, irrespective of the nuclear deal. It's a top priority for us to make sure that our people are treated fairly. And on the face of it, in the case of these individuals who've been held, they have not been. And they are not being afforded the basic due process and legal rights that we afford visitors to our country. So we're deeply concerned about it. We spend a lot of time pushing on it, and we will continue to do so. And there's no lessening of the sense of urgency. So when I talk to the families, we remind them of the fact that that is a mission that will continue and has been worked on consistently throughout their captivity. With respect to the larger issue of whether I trust the Iranian regime, as I've said before, there are deep-seated disagreements and divisions between the United States and Iran, and those aren't going to go away overnight. The goal of the nuclear negotiations is not to rely on trust, but to set up a verifiable mechanism where we are cutting off the pathways for Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. And John Kerry right now is there, along with Secretary of Energy Moniz, who's one of the top nuclear physicists in the world. They are deeply engaged in negotiations. My hope is that they can achieve an agreement, but my instructions to them have been extremely clear. The framework agreement that was established at Rousseff is one that, if implemented effectively and codified properly, would in fact achieve my goal, which is Iran not obtaining a nuclear weapon. There has been a lot of talk on the other side from the Iranian negotiators about whether in fact they can abide by some of the terms that came up in Rousseff. If they cannot, that's going to be a problem. Because I've said from the start, I will walk away from the negotiations if, in fact, it's a bad deal. If we can't provide assurances that the pathways for Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon are closed, and if we can't verify that, if the inspections regime, the verification regime is inadequate, then we're not going to get a deal. And we've been very clear to the Iranian government about that. And the good news is that our P5+1 partners in these negotiations feel exactly the same way. So, there's still some hard negotiations to take place, but ultimately this is going to be up to the Iranians to determine whether or not they meet the requirements that the international community has set forth to be able to fairly and accurately and consistently assess whether or not they have foreclosed the possibility of obtaining a nuclear weapon. And given past behavior on the part of Iran, that can't simply be a declaration by Iran and a few inspectors wandering around every once in a while. That's going to have to be a serious, rigorous verification mechanism. And that, I think, is going to be the test as to whether we get a deal or not. Okay.
Bom,
Yes, it is true. Yes, it is true. I did cancel my previous trip to the U.S. at that point in time. Since then, some things have changed, and the change is particularly due to the fact that President Obama and the U.S. government have stated on several occasions that they would no longer engage in intrusive acts of spying friendly countries. I believe President Obama. And furthermore, he has told me that, if he should he ever need non-public information about Brazil, he would just pick up the phone and call me. So yes, I am certain that the conditions today have become very different.
eu agora queria
At this point, I would like to call upon journalist Sandra Coutinho with the Global News Network.
All the help we can get.
Well, if Brazil's playing somebody else, then maybe I'll.
Sure.
If they're playing the United States, I'm sorry.
No, not against the United States. Okay, Mr. President, you were talking about a new relationship based on trust. And President Dilma just mentioned when Brazil canceled this trip because a matter of trust. And Brazil is also in the middle of a very deep political and economical crisis. Can you trust one another in this moment to build this new chapter?
Well, my
And
relation.
President.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. E, presidente, o Brasil se vê como
Madam President, Brazil views itself as a global player and leader in the world scene, and the U.S. sees Brazil.
All right, so there you got a brief look at what's going on at the White House right now with the president and Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff talking about a number of issues at hand, talking about the Iranian hostage situation, which we just discussed with former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, about the need, Richardson says, to tie these negotiations with the Americans being held in Iran to the Iranian nuclear deal, imposing more sanctions, perhaps getting tougher with Iran. The president saying there needs to be more discussion about a, quote, serious and rigorous verification mechanism with the nuclear deal, but that the hostage or prisoner negotiations should be done separately.
Right, I thought it was interesting to hear him say this is not about establishing a relationship of trust, but rather a viable mechanism to make sure, I want to make sure I get this right, Iran can't obtain a nuclear weapon.
Right, which is his stated goal, and a lot of folks...
Very careful there with his wording.
Right, are not sure if that will be possible. That's why, I guess, the deal has been delayed. All parties agreeing to doing that. Also talking about that very awkward issue when the United States was caught spying on the Brazilian president, which forced her to cancel her last trip to the United States. But it appears as though everything is simpatico now. They're friends, and they feel like they can trust each other. Spanish, not necessarily Portuguese, but it's interesting to see those two very disparate topics, but the matter of trust, the common thread there. Can the United States and Brazil trust each other? Can the United States and Iran trust each other?
I think it's interesting that they're wanting to have a relationship, but have it not be about trust.
With Iran.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to take an enormous amount of trust for the American people, I think, now at this point. So much of the discussion has been, does delaying these talks only give advantage to the Iranians? Should they just get up away from the table and walk away and say it's over for now? And really kind of put the ball back in the court of the Iranians to come back to the table. More sanctions. Sanctions are what brought them to the negotiating table the first time around. Maybe more sanctions and more demands, including the release of those American prisoners, might you know, is
But
it time
that's
to get tough?
difficult to know without being there and
Right,
seeing what's
right.
happening
Of course, we are
behind
not
closed
in
doors.
Vienna behind closed doors, so time will tell on that. We will keep our eye on what the president has to say. I'm sure more questions will come. We'll continue to follow that. You can also stay tuned to Newsmax.com.